Welcome to episode number 15. I'm CJ Werleman. Thank you for joining us. This week we examine how the Western news media continues to report the conflict in Afghanistan by offering up boilerplate tropes about the Taliban, while ignoring and whitewashing Afghan government war crimes and falsely blaming Pakistan. But first, a quick reminder to hit the subscribe button below so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Now let's get into it. Look, after 20 years of continued US and NATO military engagement in Afghanistan, you've pretty much heard everything there is to know about the Taliban. If you've ever had access to the New York Times, BBC News, Washington Post, and any of the Western world's major news media flagships, then you will know the Taliban is guilty of committing the worst forms of human rights violations imaginable. It's nearly impossible to read a newspaper article about the militant group without also reading the words barbaric, backwards, and violent, mostly because these descriptors fit neatly with the Western world's preconceived notion of what a gun-carrying Muslim in a developing world looks like. Look, no one here is arguing the Taliban isn't guilty of committing heinous crimes and human rights violations. Their hyper-conservative and often perverted interpretation of Islam has produced unimaginable horrors against those who have resisted their rule, particularly women. But as the Taliban makes its approach towards the Afghan capital, Kabul, village by village, town by town, and city by city, the Western media is tripping over itself into producing headlines that scream a one-sided and one-dimensional moral panic. And while the Taliban's vicious and cruel attacks on civilians by means of suicide bombings and the like are undeniable, the same kind of cruelty and slaughter that's being dished out by the Afghan central government security forces is being totally ignored and even whitewashed by the same news media organizations. So let's speak clearly and honestly. The Afghan government is a Western-backed puppet regime that has routinely bombed schools, mosques, and marketplaces and massacred civilians throughout Afghanistan, but this undeniable truth is conveniently scrubbed out of the Western media reporting. Worse, the people of Afghanistan, and I mean all the people of Afghanistan, not only those who live behind security compounds in Kabul, are made an irrelevant backdrop to the unfolding violence. You see, the media is drawn to stories that demonstrate the Taliban to be a bloodthirsty gang of marauders, be it their public executions, use of child soldiers, or decapitations of foreign journalists. Because these media organizations know all too well that their audiences demand an easy-to-understand Hollywood retelling of a good guy versus bad guy story. And therefore, anything that makes the supposed bad guy look even worse and scarier makes it easy to cheer for the supposed good guys, while also giving our 20-year history of violence and bloodletting in the country a veneer of respectability. But it's this kind of selective media coverage that helps maintain our false sense of moral superiority. So what the media is not showing you are the war crimes and human rights violations committed by the corrupt regime we put into power in Kabul. They're deliberately turning a blind eye to indiscriminate air attacks carried out by Afghan forces on entire civilian neighborhoods under Taliban control. And in those rare moments it does report the aftermath of an air raid, it leaves out the fact that devastation on the ground was caused by Afghan government forces like this here. And as the Taliban draws closer to Kabul, American political leaders and pundits are urging the United States to carry out further airstrikes. So right on cue, the US military unleashed its B-52 bombers, drones and gunships to smash Taliban targets from 38,000 feet above the ground, carrying out 10 to 15 airstrikes per night for the past week. On Sunday, the US boasted it had killed 200 Taliban fighters in a single series of airstrikes, but said not a single word about civilian casualties, as it almost never does. But what we do know for certain is these airstrikes kill many innocent Afghan women, men and children on the ground. We also know that in 2019 alone, US airstrikes killed more than 700 civilians and killed an average of 582 civilians per year from 2007 to 2016. And that in fact, the US dropped more bombs in 2018 and 2019 than the height of the US military occupation in 2011. We also know that airstrikes were responsible for 40% of all civilian casualties in Afghanistan during the past 5 years, with children accounting for 1,600 deaths. Which means what? It means these airstrikes do nothing to end war and bring about peace, and only bring about a further prolonging of suffering and death. That we not learn this after 2 decades of a war that has killed nearly 100,000 civilians says something about our total indifference towards human life in Muslim-majority countries. Furthermore, that the Afghan government requires foreign air power to keep the Taliban at bay only further demonstrates just how unpopular the Afghan government is among the Afghan people. I mean, military commanders are openly telling journalists that there is zero motivation for the army to fight for the corrupt government in Kabul, and that many soldiers are just better off switching sides. Which leaves us where? It leaves us with no end in sight to the killing. This current year has already recorded a record number of civilians killed, with the Taliban responsible for 39% of these deaths and Afghan government forces responsible for 25%. Clearly, there are no good guys in a war that has little to do with everyday Afghan people. The United Nations has warned an unprecedented number of Afghan lives could be lost if the violence is not stemmed. But the Afghan government and its American allies continue to believe they can kill and bomb their way to victory, while at the same time wealthy Kabul elites continue to funnel US and local money out of the country into their luxury properties in the United Arab Emirates. In fact, government insiders funneled billions of dollars out of Afghanistan and into Dubai, all of which was known by the US government, and all of which deprived the Afghan people of money to be invested in the country's schools, hospitals and roads, which has ultimately dented the appeal of the government and broadened the appeal of the Taliban. In fact, a UK government study found out of every $100 of foreign development assistance, only $20 made its way to the people of Afghanistan. The rest funneled into the grubby hands of Kabul's political elites, who then parked this stolen cash in the UAE. And right there is a key element of the Afghan reality overlooked by the Western media, which for years has wrongly portrayed the government to be representative of the Afghan people. The undeniable reality is this: government corruption has done more to exacerbate poverty in Afghanistan than the Taliban's regressive interpretation of Islam ever has. But nobody in the Western media is willing to admit this, because doing so would undermine the central narrative of the war on terror that secular democracies are virtuous and that Islamic fundamentalists are fundamentally evil. But there's just no denying that the violence dished out by the Afghan government on the Afghan people is at least equal to or greater than the violence dished out by the Taliban. I mean, take this guy for instance. This dude is the current Afghan defense minister, and he is accused of operating a network of torture and rape dungeons. Oh, and by the way, he's also accused of murdering 3 UN employees and raping several Afghan children. But this kind of reporting is interruptive to the good guy, bad guy binary the Western media prefers to report war and conflict in foreign land. Look, it's easy and lazy to focus only on the Taliban, and even easier to blame Pakistan, while ignoring how Afghan security forces, along with American, British and Australian soldiers, have committed countless number of war crimes during the past 2 decades. I mean, who can forget this guy? He pleaded guilty to murdering 16 Afghan men, women and children in Kandahar province in 2012. But former US President Donald Trump considered giving him a presidential pardon, as he did with other jailed American war criminals. But somehow we aren't shocked and outraged by our own violence, or that of our Afghan allies, even when the only thing that separates them from us is we don't upload our videos of our crimes onto social media. For instance, we scream blue bloody murder when ISIS incinerates a Jordanian Air Force pilot to death in a steel cage. But we turn a blind eye to US warplanes incinerating 5,000 Syrian civilians to death in their homes during the air raid campaign against ISIS-held Raqqa in 2017. But ultimately it all boils down to this: what the Afghan people want more than anything is peace. They, better than anyone, know that peace cannot be attained militarily, and it's they who should determine the best possible path towards peace in a country that has spent the past 40 years in armed conflict. But when we pretend one side is morally superior to the other, we only invite calls for more aerial bombardments, resulting in more civilian casualties and a delaying of peace. When will we ever learn this? Anyway, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please like and subscribe to the channel and help spread the word with your family and friends on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. And also please consider supporting this endeavor by becoming a member of this show at patreon.com/CJ Wellerman. But for now, good night, good morning, or good day, wherever you are, and stay blessed.